All right, welcome to episode 3 of the Heat Chat podcast. As always, your host here, Andrew White, with my co-host Matthew Truty. And today we're going to play a fun little game called Overrated or Underrated. Matt, you want to go ahead and tell them what it is?
Yeah, basically we're just going to call out a player, one of our players on our list, and the other person is going to state whether or not that player is underrated or overrated.
So this should be pretty interesting.
You want to go ahead and start, or?
Yeah, we usually have pretty different lists when it comes to stuff like this, so this is going to be fun.
For some reason we don't really choose the same players oftentimes either, so that was a good sign. Even when we were making lists, didn't have the same players, so always a good sign there. But right. You want to go first with the overrated, underrated, or you want to just roll out? You're just going to roll out your players. Or you're going to roll out a player first. You want me to go first?
I'll go first. All right. Overrated or underrated?
Right.
You ready? Overrated or underrated?
Yep.
Andre Drummond.
I'm ready. Andre Drummond.
Center.
This is actually an interesting one. This is actually kind of an interesting one because for the main man for Detroit, and one-time All-Star player, which is really interesting. Always on a perennial basis, on a yearly basis, always leading top of the league in total rebounds. Oftentimes, I'm gonna go with underrated personally because for Andre Drummond, I mean the guy really, if he could ever just develop an offensive game consistently, he could be like the best center in the league just purely based off of his rebounding numbers. The one thing as a downside of him is, not the greatest shot blocker in the world. Still pretty solid, but he's so young, and I know that there are obviously some people out there who probably just hate the fact that he's just an atrocious free throw shooter, and at times is just, really cannot score the ball at a high rate, but he's been so reliable for Detroit, playing in nearly every game over the last 4 years, missing only 3. And, just playing so well in terms of a rebounding big man. I mean, almost everything you want in a big man. Shooting a high field goal percentage, obviously, relatively high. But I have to go with underrated for Andre Drummond.
See, you said something earlier, and I think it's my whole problem with Andre Drummond. You said he's the main guy for the Detroit Pistons. And
yeah,
I don't think he should be the main guy for anyone. Like you said, he's a terrible free throw shooter. He's almost unplayable in the last 2 minutes of the game just because you're betting on the fact that he might go 0 for 2 or 1 for 2 from the free throw line in important possessions in a close game. The odds are not in his favor that he goes 2 for 2, which is what you need out of a guy that's going to be the number one option on your team. Second off, his offensive game is pretty weak. He doesn't have a good post-up game. He doesn't have a lot of touch around the rim, really. His game is really more suited to that of a DeAndre Jordan type of role, I think, personally. Rolling to the basket, getting offensive putbacks, alley-oops off some pick and rolls and some weak side action. But that's just not how he's being used. He's being used as a number one guy in Detroit. And obviously, Detroit doesn't have a lot of guys that could fill that role. Reggie Jackson tried to do it, but he's just not really a superstar type of player. I think his ceiling is a solid starter. But to me, if Drummond really wants to maximize his skill set, he needs to be that third option on a team. It's going to allow him to focus more on his defense. It's going to allow him to have more energy on the defensive end, which has been a problem for him. Now, obviously, he's not going to turn into a great defender. He's going to struggle in the pick and roll, just how large he is and how hard it has to be to move laterally for him. But at the same time, he's 7 feet tall. He should be able to be. There's no reason to think that he can't be one of the best rim protectors in the league if he really focused and tried on it. So I'm going with Andre Drummond is overrated. I can think of a pretty substantial list of centers that I'd take over him right now. I know he's young, but he's been in the league for quite some time now, and he hasn't really shown any improvement. He kind of plateaued. Like you said, he is a fantastic rebounder, probably the best in the league. But to me, his rebounding, it really doesn't benefit his team enough to offset his free throw shooting, his lack of an offensive game, and his average at best defense. So I'm gonna go with overrated for Andre Drummond.
All right, so I go with the underrated, and you go for the overrated with Andre Drummond, and I guess I'll give you one of my players now. Another big man. We'll go with Marc Gasol. Underrated or overrated?
Marc Gasol. I'm gonna go with underrated. Marc Gasol is pretty
Or
underrated.
okay, yeah.
He
I guess hypothetically, you can also go with they're just right.
I'm gonna go with I think in a lot of circles he's pretty properly rated. A lot of people recognize him as probably a top 3 center in the league. But there are still some people who just don't appreciate him for what he is. His passing is superb. It's unbelievable. I think he's really on a level similar to that of Nikola Jokic down in Denver, and people don't really notice that about him. He is the gear that keeps Memphis's offense turning. Him and Mike Conley together really are what drives the Memphis machine that seems to get into the playoffs every year and cause trouble for teams. He's a former Defensive Player of the Year. Obviously, he's getting older and his defense is going to fall off a little bit. But that being said, he's still an elite rim protector. He's another 7-footer, so he's not going to be this animal defending the pick and roll, but he's average enough that he can hold his own. He's not a liability on defense, that's for sure. His post game is still there. The fadeaways on the block, the little jump hooks. He's a treat to watch. He really is. Didn't he have a game winner against the Spurs this playoffs?
Yeah, he did have a game winner against the Spurs, which helped them try to advance against the San Antonio Spurs, but obviously
not.
They fell short of that.
Kawhi did Kawhi things, but that's okay. Gasol's one of those guys. He doesn't shoot a ton of threes, but he can step out to about 18 feet, hit that mid-range shot, which I think is so important in today's game. Having a center that can spread the floor at least a little bit. That's another reason why I don't like Andre Drummond, by the way. No jump shot, no offensive capabilities beyond 3 feet of the rim. But I'm going to go with underrated for Marc Gasol. I think people tend to think, for whatever reason, that he's still second fiddle to his brother Pal. But that's just not the case anymore. Marc is by far the better of the two, at least in this point in their careers. And I think it's interesting. I don't know if he'll finish out his career in Memphis. I think there's talks of him maybe getting traded to Boston, maybe going to play for a contender. And I think if you put a guy like Marc Gasol on a team like Boston that struggles with rebounding and defense and rim protection, people are going to start to take notice. Like I said before, the Boston Celtics right now with Marc Gasol have a real chance at upsetting the Cavs and giving the Warriors a series in the East.
Yeah, I have to go with the same for you right there, or same with you right there on the underrated from Marc Gasol. Not the rebounder, not a rebounder that is going to be the best in the league at the center position. He definitely thrives on his abilities as both a rim protector or defensively just as a rim protector, but also obviously in the offensive game, his ability to stretch the floor is really crazy because he just last year started to actually legitimately be a threat from the 3-point line for the first time in his career, averaging 3.6 points or 3-point attempts per game, and ended up averaging nearly 40% of a shooting percentage from the 3-point line, or 3-point land. So, to be honest with you, I mean, this guy is just one of the best centers in the league. In my opinion, I think he's the best center in the league. So the fact that some people, I feel like he's underrated. I don't see people seem like they have other centers in mind when they think of the best guys in the league, but his passing ability, top 5, center in the league in terms of assist numbers. Many regard him as the best center in the league in terms of just his ability to get the ball to players as a center, as a big man. And to be honest with you, I got to completely agree. I mean, he's really underrated. I'm surprised that he's so underrated because he's one of the best centers in the league. And again, like you mentioned, his ability to stretch the floor and be both a great mid-range shooter and 3-point shooter now, that's really valuable in today's game, especially with how people are played defensively. And even as a free throw shooter, one of the best guys in the league, shot almost 84% from the free throw line. There's just so many good aspects of his game that are far and above better than a lot of these guys, that especially like even the Drummond, which I considered underrated, but he's just a great player and definitely underrated in my eyes.
Can we just talk about how crazy it is about these 7-footers stepping out and hitting threes? I mean, Brooke Lopez hit 136 threes
yeah.
last season. Can you even? It blows my mind now that I think in the near future we're gonna have. It's gonna be a necessity for a championship team to have 5 guys that can shoot the three. Like, can you imagine?
They actually talked about this. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
They were talking about this a little bit on Summer League games, how, do you think at some point there will be, every player on the team for each starting lineup, they will have to shoot the 3-point line? And, the argument against it is that there will always be a dominant big man who can control the paint and be a force inside. That's the argument against it. Obviously, the argument with it is that, at some point, because, there's been so many guys that have converted to it, that eventually everybody will be a 3-point threat on the court. So, it is crazy. I mean, you talked about Brooke Lopez. I didn't even really watch Brooke Lopez that much, but then Karl Anthony Towns, he comes in the league. Jokic, obviously Porzingis is not a center, but so many big men trying to shoot the 3-pointer now. I mean, a guy like Kevin Garnett, we're in the league now. He would be trying to work on his 3-point game. A lot of the bigger guys. So it is funny how the game has changed. Less focused on the mid range and more on the deep threes for that extra point.
And, it's getting to the point where these centers are coming into the league with a 3-point shot. I mean, Joel Embiid, didn't shoot at the 3 a lot at Kansas, but, I mean, his first NBA game, he was knocking down, I think he hit 2 or 3 from the perimeter. It's just part of the game now. And people talk about how, people that don't really like how many threes are being shot right now, they talk about, they want to go back to the big men dominating down low. They want more Shaqs and less Curry, And I think that if they really want that, then we need to shoot more threes. And here's why I say that. I know it doesn't really make sense, but when you have 5 guys on the floor that are stretching out and spacing the floor so much, it's going to allow more room for those big guys to work down inside. And you're going to get these guys that can't really shoot the 3 but focus all their time on destroying these guys in the post. And the big man will make a comeback, I think. Can you imagine putting Shaq on the Warriors right now, just with the spacing and how much space he would have down low?
It would just be a field day for the shooters, to be honest, because, I mean, eventually they're going to realize and respect. It's the same thing out with the Lakers. They respect how powerful and how great he is down low. Guys are left open for threes. It would be unstoppable. I mean, even more crazier than they are right now.
It's just madness.
But I guess we'll go on to, so Marc Gasol, we both have him as underrated, which makes, pretty decent amount of sense. I mean, he's just probably the definition of one of the more underrated players. But I guess I'll go into another player, or I guess it's your turn now to go with one of your guys.
All right, I'm going to go with Bradley Beal. Overrated or underrated?
Bradley Beal. Wow. I got to be honest, I actually am going to go underrated with Bradley Beal, because I think it's so tough for me to go with overrated for young players, and he's such a young player, and he really has grown as a guy. Averaged nearly 6 more points per game in the 2016-2017 campaign, helped the Washington Wizards get to the Eastern Conference semifinals, only to fall to the Boston Celtics. And, because he's growing and developing as a player, and really perennially has gotten better in terms of field goal percentage and 3-point percentage, it's so tough for me to say that he is an overrated player. I have to say he's underrated, because you could make the legitimate argument that he is just correct, that they just have him at the right spot in terms of, what he's rated as in general by a lot of analysts and stuff around the league. However, he's still so young, and guys give so much credit to John Wall, and even Otto Porter has gotten a lot of credit, now the highest paid player with the Wizards. Bradley Beal, arguably he's so valuable as a shooter, and that team needs him so bad. And obviously they need those other 2 guys in Wall and Porter a lot, but Beal seems like a guy that sometimes is left out, especially because didn't make the All-Star game in the East, which is quite a shock. And I'd be surprised if he doesn't make it next year, because I don't know if there are really too many. I don't know if there would be too many other shooting guards in the East that should really make it over him, and that includes DeMar DeRozan. So. that's my thoughts on Bradley Beal. I think he's underrated.
I'm gonna agree with you there, and I it I know that Giannis did his thing in Milwaukee, and had the crazy number jump, and all of a sudden was one of the best all around, most versatile players in the league. But I think it's insane that Bradley Beal didn't get more attention for Most Improved Player.
Yeah,
I mean,
agreed.
6 points a game increase from his last season. He shot 40% from deep on 5 attempts a game, or I'm sorry, on 10 attempts a game. Those are elite shooter numbers. And in today's league, like we were saying, so many guys are shooting threes. It's such a valuable skill set to have now that I think, I'm with you. I would take Bradley Beal over DeMar DeRozan if I was starting a team and I wanted to win a championship.
I mean, it's not even through just his shooting ability. I mean, he kind of showcased that he can attack the basket and still get some things to go. I mean, when you average 23 points a game and you watch the way he played last year, he really has developed as a guy who can score in a variety of ways. And in the playoffs, arguably better and more effective than DeMar DeRozan was. Granted, he didn't have to play against the Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference semifinals, but, the same point applies.
Yeah, and to kind of back up your point there, he shot 40% from 3, but on his 2-point attempts, he shot 53%. Those are elite numbers. And
yeah,
I think that when you ask people to list their top shooting guards in the league, I think generally, I don't know, is James Harden a shooting guard again now that Chris Paul's in Houston?
I don't know. I think that's a tough argument. I guess he is a shooting guard now. It seems like he's going to give everybody said he's going to give the responsibility to Chris Paul. So I would assume that he will be the 2 at this point.
Okay, if he's going to be the 2, then I think when you're talking about the best shooting guards in the league, a lot of people are going to go Harden number 1, which is where he should be. And then they're going to go
Clay. Argument Clay, to be honest.
Clay.
And that might be an argument for a different day because I might argue Clay's better than Harden at the 2 position.
All right, so generally you're going to go 1 and 2, some order of Clay and Harden. At the 3, a lot of people put DeMar DeRozan, and then Bradley Beal kind of slides in that 4th spot. Maybe you have guys like C.J. McCollum up there as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it. I think he's by far and away a top 3 shooting guard in the league. Just the way that he's improved, his offensive game is just among the. I can't even stress his shooting enough. It's unbelievable. It really is.
I mean, the efficiency levels he had.
They're off the charts.
With not having like a bunch of other options. I mean, I think it's tough to say that the Wizards really were a more talent. Had more talent, and it helped DeMar get his All-Star game. But in terms of percentages from the field and from the 3-point line, everywhere nearly. I mean, he was just inferior. Obviously, the points per game were higher, but he also averaged more shot attempts per game by 9. So, things just were better for Bradley Beal last year, and obviously people didn't believe that was the case, and so he wasn't voted to the All-Star game. But Beal seems like, at the moment, a guy who's trending upwards, and even though DeMar DeRozan's numbers in terms of points per game are going higher, efficiency is not. So, Bradley Beal definitely deserving of a All-Star, placement next year.
And, a lot of his numbers against DeMar DeRozan, like when you're comparing the two, you got to think about shot selection. DeMar takes a lot of contested mid-range jumpers. And in today's league, that's just not the shot that most teams are really looking for. It's a shot that you can go to in crunch time when you need a bucket. But in the playoffs, when defenses are keying in on that, defense is tougher, it's more physical, it's going to be a lot harder to hit those shots. Beal's game is the kind that can translate to the playoffs. And I know there's a big hoopla about, jump shooting teams in the playoffs and how that's not really a recipe for success. But if you look at the past, 5 years or so,
it almost has been the recipe for success.
Golden State jump shooting team. Cleveland might even be in contention for more of a jump shooting team than the Warriors, honestly.
Yeah.
Houston jump shooting team, making it to probably the conference finals this year, if I had to guess. And so I think in today's NBA, Beal is the guy that you'd rather have, and I have him as a top 3 shooting guard in the league over DeMar DeRozan. And so I'm going to go ahead and say that he's underrated in that regard.
Yeah, so we both go with underrated Bradley Beal. And so for another player on my list, it's going to be interesting. Speaking of the Raptors, how about Kyle Lowry? Overrated or an underrated player?
When you talk about Kyle Lowry, you have to really
Or he plays just correctly.
You got to consider the context here. Lowry was never really one of those guys that was expected to be a star. Through his first 6 seasons in the league, he averaged 5 points, 10 points, 7, 7, 7, and 9 points per game. He just really wasn't that good. He was a serviceable backup in Houston, and he played a little bit in Memphis as well. But he was never really a guy that anyone expected to contend for even a reserve spot in an all-star game, much less be a starter or anything like that. But all of a sudden, once he got traded to Toronto, his numbers started climbing up, 17 points a game, 21, 22, and all of a sudden people are talking about him as maybe a top 3 point guard in the East alongside, obviously DeMar DeRozan. They got Ibaka this year, and they had a pretty good team. So in that regard, with context to where he was to where he is now, I think he's incredibly underrated. People don't realize how much he's improved his game. That being said, if you're going to be ranked as a top 3 player in the league, you're going to need to go ahead and produce in the playoffs. And that's where the biggest gripe about Lowry is. When we look at his playoff numbers, it's incredibly different. It's like an almost completely different player. This past season, he averaged 22 points a game in the regular season. In the playoffs, that dipped down to 15. That's a substantial drop off, 8 points per game. And you see guys like Wall and Kyrie Irving, Isaiah Thomas. Those guys really kind of elevate their game in the playoffs. Isaiah had that huge game against Cleveland even after his sister passed away, which was unbelievable. But Kyle Lowry just doesn't really step up his game in the playoffs. His shot doesn't fall. Some say he's been injured, but this is a trend. It's a trend. It's not a one-time thing where he struggled just this year or last year. It's been almost every playoffs of his career. There's been quite a substantial drop-off, except for 2013, where his numbers kind of remained on par with what his averages were for the season. I think I'm going to go ahead and say that regular season Kyle Lowry is underrated and playoff Kyle Lowry is overrated. Playoff Kyle Lowry is a pretty mediocre starter, I'm going to go ahead and say. He's not incredibly efficient. He doesn't shoot the 3 ball that well. While regular season Kyle Lowry, like I said, completely different player, shooting 40% from 3, 22 points a game. I think he can be a top 3 point guard in the East. He's shown that he can run an offense. He doesn't exactly have the best coach. They're not really drawing up some great plays, and so it's hard for him to be efficient sometimes and really look like one of the best point guards out there. But until he can elevate his game in the playoffs, if I just had to slap one label on him, I'm going to go ahead with overrated. I think if I were picking people to start my team, I would go, Kyrie, John Wall, Isaiah Thomas, guys like that. Maybe even Goran Dragic, honestly, out of Miami. Guys like that to go ahead and start my team over Kyle Lowry.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that one. It's really tough to argue with that and the fact that in the postseason, he's just not the same player. Regular season, he's able to put up some good numbers that's able to get him to those all-star games. But then come playoff time, it's a little bit of an odd situation. Definitely injuries have played a role. In terms of field goal attempts, it's interesting. It's very, dropped off this year quite a bit. And the percentage in terms of efficiency really wasn't too bad, although from the three-point line was not very good. It's interesting when you look at, obviously, the point total as well, dropping down from 19.1 to 15.8 this year. You mentioned that earlier. You referenced that. I went straight up and just said overrated because when you talk about a guy who's an all-star player, I feel like Kemba Walker should be a guy that probably should be mentioned more often if you're going to talk about the best point guards in the East, because Lowry's surrounded by some pretty good talent. Obviously, you have Ibaka, DeMar DeRozan, Valanciunas is a serviceable center. Kemba Walker really has not had that luxury of even having players like that, and he's still putting up some pretty good numbers. I would just prefer him over a guy like Kyle Lowry when you talk about some of the better players in the East in terms of the point guard position. I mean, Walker this year, almost 45% from the field, 3-point line, almost exactly 40% from the field, from the 3-point line, scoring a bunch per game. He's leading his team to victory, and obviously was also an all-star. But I just think that he's a guy that probably should be placed better. So I think Kyle Lowry is overrated in his position as a point guard in the league. That's just my personal opinion on the matter. And you hit it right on the head. You talked about postseason him being inferior, and that's just the case. That's just how it's been.
Yeah, at some point you just got to step up in the playoffs. There is no rhyme or reason that a team with Kyle Lowry, Serge Ibaka, Jonas Valanciunas, and DeMar DeRozan on it should ever get swept in a playoff series. I don't care who they're playing. Unless they're playing the 96 Bulls, they should be able to squeak out at least one win. And they couldn't do that against Cleveland this year. I'm honestly disappointed. I think that Dwayne Casey needs to go as a coach. And maybe we'll see Lowry, if they hire someone that's kind of more of an X's and O's guys, because the Raptors do run a lot of isolation plays, which can be tough on a point guard, because when the whole team is standing around waiting for an ISO, that ball movement, and that kind of free-flowing offensive style that really benefits point guards in this league doesn't really start to exist anymore. So maybe he can flourish and live up to what people are labeling him as if he gets a different coach. But right now, I feel like he's just underperforming. And so I'm going to go with overrated.
Yeah, so we got this mindset on that one. So on to you for your next play.
All right. Now this one is one near and dear to my heart. I'm a real big fan of this player and his story. So I'm interested to see what you have to say. Overrated or underrated? Hassan Whiteside.
Ooh, Hassan Whiteside. Now, it's funny actually when you talk about Hassan Whiteside, because he was a guy that I actually thought was a lot younger than he actually is. I think he's getting a little bit older in the NBA at this point. I think he's getting in his late 20s, almost in his 30s. I thought he was one of those guys like Drummond who was, in his early 20s, but Hassan Whiteside, 28, didn't play a couple of years, and now kind of had a revitalized career in Miami. I think you have to go with underrated for Hassan because there are centers in the East that obviously have been serviceable, and we've discussed some of them in recent memory. But Hassan Whiteside, arguably, he has the talents to be the best center in the East. I mean, his rebounding numbers, the best in the league last year, is a great shot blocker. Not a good one, a great shot blocker. Averaged 3.7 blocks per game 2 years back. This year, 2.1 blocks a game, 17 points per game. Even can hit the mid-range shot. So when we talked about this earlier with guys like Drummond, Whiteside can actually hit the mid-range a little bit. So to be honest with you, I got to go with underrated for Hassan Whiteside. The Heat are in a pretty good position with him. Nearly made the playoffs, to be honest with you. They got Deion Waiters, Dragic, and Whiteside. Those three, they could lead Miami to a playoff spot for sure, and even do some damage, given with the landscape of the Eastern Conference at the moment. He's just getting better year in, year out. Not a great free throw shooter, but Shaq wasn't either. I'm not saying he's going to be like Shaq in any way, shape, or form, but you can have a big man to be effective and not be a great free throw shooter, especially given the fact that he's such a great defensive anchor for the Heat. And I got to go with underrated. That's just my thoughts. I actually agree with you. I'm assuming you're going to say something relatively similar.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Hassan Whiteside. I think that when we're talking about centers in the East, I think he's better than Al Horford for sure. I think you can build a team around Whiteside. I don't think you can really build a team around Al Horford. Guys like Dwight Howard's in the East
really
now.
Center. He's more of a power forward.
Yeah.
Howard is out of his prime for sure.
Yeah, so I'd definitely take him over Howard. I don't know. To me, a guy like Whiteside, like you said, 17 points a game this year. He's a fantastic rebounder. He's up there with Drummond, at least in terms of rebounds a game. 14 rebounds a game last year, which actually led the league. So he's a 17-14 guy on a nightly basis, which is just ridiculous. Now, 17 points a game can seem a little low for a guy that I'm talking about as potentially a franchise player, in my opinion. But he did shoot 57% from the field, I believe, if I'm reading that right.
Higher than Drummond?
Higher than Drummond for sure. 55% from the field, my bad. 55% from the field last year. He shoots 73% from the block, which is fantastic, incredibly efficient down there. So I think that if he just took a couple more shots a game, we could easily see him as a 20-12 guy, maybe even a 20-14 guy. And, in today's league where teams are going small, like we were talking about earlier, guys stepping out to hit the three, Whiteside has a pretty good mid-range game. He kind of struggled last year beyond 10 feet, only hitting about 40% for his career 42. But inside that block to free throw area, that kind of 3 to 10 feet, he shoots about 45% from his career 44, which is not bad at all. I believe that Chris Paul is around about like 46 or 47% from the mid-range. Now, I'm not saying that Whiteside is anywhere near the shooter that Chris Paul is, but just to kind of give you a frame of reference there. The Heat finished the season 30-11, obviously on pace there for 60 wins. And it was largely due to the play of Whiteside. I mean, he was insane. He was their anchor on defense. He was putting up 20-20 games on offense. Him and Goran Dragic really just kind of powered the Heat through one of the most insane turnarounds I've ever seen. For a team to go from 11-30 halfway through the season to 30-11 in the second half, it's just ridiculous. And, Whiteside was a key part of that. I think Whiteside is definitely better than Drummond. Now, he didn't make an All-NBA team, but honestly, I think he's pretty close. I think if you're talking about centers, I don't know, is Anthony Davis a center? Do we count him as a center?
I don't count him as a center, but I think some people do.
I think now that he's on the team with Cousins, he's probably more of a power forward. But when he's on his own, he can definitely play center.
Yeah.
We'll call him a power forward, though. So I would go, we have Cousins, Marc Gasol, DeAndre Jordan, guys like that. Honestly, I would take Hassan Whiteside over a guy like DeAndre Jordan. He provides
you could make an argument for that. For
similar
sure.
block numbers. Obviously Jordan's going to be the better defender, but Whiteside's offensive game, it's one of the most polished in the league. I think we're looking at Gasol number 1, Cousins number 2, and after that, I'm going to go with Whiteside. His playmaking could be a little bit. It leaves a little bit to be desired. He's not the great passer. I think there was a play a year or two ago where Whiteside actually passed out of a double team on the block and got an assist, and Eric Spoelstra actually called a timeout to congratulate him on doing that because it's just something that he never really did. But if he can just improve his passing a little bit, just enough that he can recognize double teams and know how to kick it out to a shooter on the corner, because Miami's a pretty good three-point shooting team. Stuff like that, I think it'll put him in that upper echelon, especially as Gasol gets a little bit older. I know Whiteside is pretty old, but he's just now entering his athletic prime. Generally, that 27 to 30 range is when guys really put up their best numbers traditionally. And with Gasol looking to decline here pretty soon, I don't think it's that outrageous to say that Whiteside can make an All-NBA team in the next couple of years, and I hope he does. So I'm going to go with underrated. His story is great, coming from the D-League to what he is now. It's just crazy. So, yeah, definitely underrated, at least in terms of where people rank him in the league.
All right, so, yeah, I think we both agree that Hassan Whiteside underrated right there. I mean, him with Miami, it's going to be interesting the next couple of years. But I guess I'll go with another player on my list right here. And we actually already discussed a teammate or a player on this team, but we're going to go with that player's teammate, Mike Conley. Is he overrated or underrated?
I think this is the first time that I'm gonna go ahead and say properly rated.
Okay.
Conley's one of those guys. Defensively, I will say this. Defensively, I think he is a top 3 defensive point guard in the league. And if you don't believe me, just go watch his series against the Warriors 2 years ago in 2015, where they took a 2-1 lead before Conley broke half of his face on the hardwood. But I think the thing that holds him back from being one of the top tier kind of echelon guys is his offensive game. It's good. It's not really elite, at least in terms of guys like Curry, Westbrook, Harden, John Wall, guys like that. And he isn't quite
even Lillard and
even guys like Lillard. He's not quite the playmaker that any of those guys are. And while his defense makes up for some of that gap, I don't know if he's maybe in the top 5 point guards that you would want to build a team around. Now, if you're going for fit, he's fantastic. If you put him next to a guy like LeBron James, or where he can, because he's a great shooter as well. I'm pretty sure he was stroking close to 40% from deep this past season, if I'm not mistaken. But he just isn't. He's not that flashy on the offensive end. He doesn't have crazy handles. He reminds me a lot of Tim Duncan in a way, just with how quiet and soft-spoken they are. They're both really big on fundamentals. Now, Conley's not anywhere near the player that Duncan was, but they just kind of have similar styles to him. So I definitely think he gets overlooked a lot when people are talking about some of the better point guards in the league in that second tier. Like, I would probably take him over a guy like Isaiah Thomas. Thomas is great. He's a fantastic scorer. But he's just such a liability on the defensive end. And a guy like Conley is someone that that you can rely on both ends of the court. He's clutch. He's really clutch. He showed that in the series against the Spurs. And he doesn't have a huge ego. So he'd be okay with being the second fiddle on the team as long as it meant that, it translated to wins. So I would take him over guys. I'd probably take him over Kyle Lowry, Isaiah Thomas, most of the guards in the East, to be honest. But as far as guards in the West go, I just don't know if he's really in that same tier. So I'm going to go ahead and say he's properly rated. Some people could pay him more attention, but for the most part, people give him his due, especially since he got that huge contract. People are coming out saying, why does Mike Conley get $150 million? And then you look at it and you say, okay, this is why. He doesn't turn the ball over a ton. He takes efficient shots. He's great at running an offense, and he's a standout on the defensive end. So all that, he's a pretty solid player. I don't think he'll ever make an all-star game just because how stacked the West is at the point guard position. But I think that's okay. I think he's properly rated by most NBA fans. He's good, but not great.
Yeah, you can definitely make that argument. For me personally, I'm going to go with underrated, and it is really tough to make arguments for a guy like Mike Conley because of how great the point guard position is in the West. I mean, just last season alone, Harden almost averaged a triple Westbrook, and then you had a guy who actually did average a triple-double, not a triple Westbrook, average a triple-double. And Mike Conley, his production in the playoffs is what really impressed me the most, and is why I have to say he's underrated, because you look at what he was able to do in the playoffs with Memphis against the San Antonio Spurs, shot 50% from the field, or from the 2-point line, from just the 2-point shooting. 3-point percentage was almost at 50%, and almost 25 points a game. He was really, really important for Memphis in that series. Ended up losing in 6, but nonetheless was still incredible. And you talk about, obviously, the regular season, how he's just kind of progressively gotten better and has continued to improve. And it is really tough to make an argument for him being better than guys if you're just talking about him being better head-to-head against a guy like Westbrook, Curry, players like that. But then you bring in his defensive game, the fact that he was a former 2012-2013 all defensive type player, and again, both sides of the court, not a liability at all, and plays for a team that in general is, regarded as an underrated team. I think you have to list him as an underrated guy because of the fact that he's just so consistent, and we don't know what he could do on teams like Houston or Oklahoma City or Golden State. We just don't know. We never will know, and that is the unfortunate reality of sports sometimes with guys like a Mike Conley who just play with a team like Memphis who doesn't have really the firepower around him that maybe could allow him to maybe bulk up his numbers in some specific areas and maybe make him look a little better by winning more games. He just isn't on the team like that. Been on Memphis his entire career and has progressively gotten better. And, again, so tough to compare to the Western guards. But the Eastern guards, I don't even know if I would take – I think Kyrie Irving, it is tough. There are some – John Wall and Kyrie Irving in the East are really tough to say that Mike Conley is better than those guys. But defensively, he really is – arguably better than those players. I think it is. You could definitely make that argument in particular. And the fact that he averaged 20 points a game this season shows that he can score the basketball, and in the playoffs he can produce. So that means a lot to me. The fact that he was able to show up so big for Memphis with a team that really just didn't have the firepower to compete with San Antonio, and he still competed and still won 2 tough games. So Mike Conley, in my opinion, underrated.
I will give you this, and kind of like in the underrated favorite. Memphis is such a small market. They don't get a lot of media attention. And so it's going to be even if he did deserve to get in the All-Star game, Memphis just has such a small fan base, and they don't really get recognized around the league as much as they should, that it would be tough for him to get in. So he definitely does play in the small market. So let me ask you this. Would you take him over Damian Lillard?
Yes, I would take him over Damian Lillard.
You would?
Yes. I prefer the guy that can. I understand. The thing about Damian Lillard that is interesting is I think Damian Lillard is a really underrated scorer, just in general, just as a scorer. But Mike Conley to me seems more like a true point guard player who can actually make his teammates around him better and win some games. I don't think Lillard is at that point yet. I think he can get to that point, but I feel like right now Conley is a guy that knows how to play the point guard position, knows how to elevate the game of the guys around him, play the point guard position the right way. Not that Lillard doesn't. I mean, Conley doesn't average way more assists than him, but that's just my personal opinion on the matter. And in terms of efficiency, Conley beats him at that. So I got to go with Conley over Lillard.
Now, if Conley was in the East, he'd definitely make an All-Star game this year, right?
Yeah, because Kemba Walker made it, and not disrespecting Kemba Walker, but Mike Conley's pretty good player as well. So I think that would make the All-Star game in the East.
Let's see. Let's take a guess here. It would be I'm going John Wall and Kyrie.
John Wall, Kyrie, and then they had Isaiah in the East as well, didn't they, this year?
Yeah, they had Isaiah in the East. So let's go.
So he could beat out Isaiah or
Kemba.
Yeah,
I agree with that. Okay, yeah. I think he'd be an All-Star if he was in the East.
Yeah, at least one time.
All right. Next up, out of my 6 players, a guy that we just kind of talked about a little bit. We touched on him a little bit. So let's go a little bit more in depth. Overrated or underrated? Kyrie Irving.
Kyrie Irving. Overrated, underrated. I'm going to say just right, actually, for Kyrie. I would say, as a guy who really just doesn't love the Cavaliers a lot, I would say overrated. But to be honest with you, Kyrie Irving is not, he's not a bad guy. So, first of all, it's hard for me to really hate on him. But also, you have to realize that, there are times where a guy like Kyrie Irving, when he's put into such tough situations, that he just can't produce the same thing he did a year ago in that Game 7 finals where he had that crazy shot at the end of the game. And at times, in the finals, there were some games where he just didn't perform at a super high level. But I think he's just right. I think he should be talked about and discussed as one of the, if not the best point guard in the Eastern Conference and one of the best in the league, because his ability to score the basketball is arguably the best in the league. I mean, some people call him the best below the rim finisher ever already, and he's only 24, 25 years old. So to me, he's just right. And you could argue that he is overrated. That would probably be the other argument, the other side of this. But I think that he actually is that good. I think that he, as a free throw shooter, obviously point guards are great, so he's among the league leaders in that. Excellent three-point shooter. We saw that in the playoffs. I know it's the Eastern Conference, and obviously for a guy like me who loves the West and thinks the West is so dominant, it's tough for me to continue to defend a guy in these, but he's getting the job done. He's performing at such a high level. When LeBron's not on, he's a guy that comes in and drops 40 on like the Celtics to help the team win the series in 5 in the Eastern Conference Finals. He's such a great player in terms of the score for his team, and you can make the argument that he doesn't make his teammates better, but at the end of the day, you can make that same argument with a guy like Kobe Bryant, although Kyrie didn't play the shooting guard position and Kobe did. Kyrie's a scorer first and a killer, and that's why I don't think he's underrated. I think he's rated just fine. He's one of the better point guards in the league.
I think Kyrie is a shooting guard trapped in a point guard's body. Honestly, if I had to describe him anyway, it'd be that. I'm gonna go with, and this is a tough one because
yeah.
Like you said, he's one of the best scorers in the league. I don't think he's a better scorer than Steph.
Yeah, you could make that. Yeah.
Curry just had a season where he scored 30 points a game, shooting 50, 45, 90, and hit 402 threes, which just shattered the old record, which he held, by the way. And but when you get a guy like Kyrie, I think most people consider him the best point guard in the East.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm going to go ahead and say that he's overrated. I don't think he's the best player, the best point guard in the East. I give that title to John Wall. I think John Wall is a guy that makes his teammates. Well, he is a guy that elevates his teammates like a point guard should, in my opinion. And you can make the argument that like just because Kyrie's assist totals aren't that high, doesn't mean he doesn't make his teammates better. But I mean, you look at a guy like Steph. He doesn't have outrageous assist numbers. His assist numbers usually hover around 6-7 a game. But that doesn't mean he doesn't make his teammates better. His spacing that he provides on the floor. He's not afraid to make that extra pass. He's not looking for the assist. He's just trying to get the offense flowing. So a guy like Steph definitely makes his teammates better, even if it doesn't show per se in the assist numbers like a guy like John Wall or Magic would. That being said, I don't think you can make the same argument for Kyrie. He's a shooter first and foremost. He's always looking to score. I don't know if we'll ever see a game where Steph, at least in the near future, where Steph has, zero assists. Kyrie's had several of those. It was a big media, whatever the word is, media kerfuffle. Whenever Kyrie had 30 points and 0 assists, and LeBron got on him and all that. I think that he would be looked at a lot differently if he was considered a shooting guard, just like Kobe. He reminds me a lot of Kobe, actually. Like you said, killer mentality. And I'll give him his credit. He does step it up in big games. He seems to love playing against the Warriors. He always plays well against Curry. I think he has the tightest handle in the league by a mile. And like you said, his finishing is out of this world. But I just don't think he can carry a team to the playoffs as the number one option like a guy like John Wall can, or a guy like Westbrook, or James Harden. Those guys all kind of put the teams on their back. And I think if you put Kyrie in any of their positions, I don't know if they make the playoffs, just like the Thunder, Rockets, and Wizards did. So that's just me. I'm going to go ahead and say that he's, at worst, the top 3 point guard in the East, but I don't think that he's the best point guard. I definitely go with John Wall, and so I'm going to go ahead and say Kyrie's overrated. I think he benefits a lot from playing next to LeBron. just from the space. Well, not necessarily the spacing, but LeBron just makes everybody around him look better. He turned Mo Williams into an all-star. Imagine what he could do for a guy like John Wall, and imagine what he has done for a guy like Kyrie.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go with overrated.
I can definitely see that argument, to be honest with you. It's just that in my eyes, I haven't seen people yet rate him as that great player. So that's why I think at this point he's just fine where he's at. And I probably gave him a little bit too much praise, but sometimes fans like myself, we get so caught up in the playoff moments, the big moments, that we sometimes have a tendency to overlook some logic like that of him actually being the leader on the team, being the main man, and seeing how far he could take a team. Because if he was put into that position, a lot of people kind of contemplate what the result be better than what Westbrook was able to do in the West, or what Harden could do as a main man in the West as well, and John Wall. So, you could definitely make that argument. I can see why you could list him as overrated. But now, that's on to me next, yeah. For my, I think, we're near the end, but we're still going strong right here. And I'm going to go with another big man here. We've done a lot thus far. And it's one of my personal favorite players, actually. A guy that probably does not get any real discussion at all. But Robin Lopez, overrated or underrated?
Oh, man. Robin Lopez is... I think he's underrated. I do. I don't know how underrated, but just the fact that if you were to ask the casual fan what they thought about Robin Lopez, half of them probably wouldn't know who you were talking about. And so in that regard, I'm going to go ahead and say that he's definitely underrated. I'm pretty sure that he's going to be the best player on the Bulls this year, maybe second behind Zach LaVine, which is crazy. But, I mean, still, to be one of the best players on an NBA team, that takes some definite skill. He's an underrated rebounder. He played really well against Boston in the first round, especially when Rondo was still in the game. He gets thrown in the shadow a lot because of his brother, obviously, Brook Lopez, who's been such a consistent, dominant force on the block for the Nets, and now presumably for the Lakers. That being said, Rolo, he was great on the Knicks. He's always a solid starter. He only averaged 10 and 6 last year for the Bulls, which is a little low for a center, especially when that guy is playing 28 minutes a game. That being said, he just brings something. He's a decent defender. He brings a lot of energy. He brings entertainment. He likes to fight the mascots. I think he's a solid starter. I wouldn't call him a star. He's not anywhere close to being an all-star or anything like that. But he's better than a lot of guys out there. Guys like Mozgov down in Brooklyn, who's probably going to start now. You have, some young guys out there that he's going to be better than. I think he's like a top 15 center in the league, but most people don't even know who he is, or couldn't tell you what team he played for. For a big man, his field goal percentage is a little low. Obviously, you're never going to want your big man to shoot below 50% from the field. But that being said, I think he's going to make your team better. He, like I said, solid on the defensive end. He can pull down some rebounds when you need him to. He's good for 10, 12, 14 points a game if he gets his shots. I think that he could flourish if he's given the right role. I think he's better than Zaza Pachulia. Now, I know I'm a Warriors fan, but I am not a big fan of Zaza. And don't even ask me if he hurt Kawhi on purpose, because he did not. That being said, Zaza does some stupid stuff, and it bothers me. And I think a guy like Lopez would definitely flourish on the Warriors. Zaza's a better defender than him, to be sure, so he might be more important to the Warriors. But overall, if they were to go head-to-head, I definitely give the edge to a guy like Robin Lopez. So I'm going to go with underrated. I think he's definitely underrated. But I'm gonna say I don't know that much about him. I haven't watched him a ton, so it's not like I'm some expert on him. But I still think that for a guy that most people don't know about, he's pretty decent.
Yeah. So I gotta get into my defense for Robin Lopez right here because he's a guy that I've kept my eye on for quite a time. I actually lived in Arizona for a little bit, so I got to watch him up close and personal in Phoenix when he was younger in his career and starting to rise up. And
Like you went to the games?
Yeah, I went to a couple games. But also with Robin Lopez, the thing you have to take into account is he's kind of been a journeyman. Started out in Phoenix. Looks like he went to even New Orleans, Portland, the Knicks, now in Chicago. And so that in and of itself, it kind of is unfortunate. He never really get a rhythm with one team. But regardless, he's still been I feel like he's been a good playmaker for each team he's been on, averaging at least 3 offensive rebounds per game over the last 4 seasons. That's a pretty good number right there. Almost averaged 5 offensive rebounds per game in the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs this year against the Boston Celtics. The number 1 seeded Boston Celtics showed how good of a player he can be on the boards. And one of the reasons why his field goal percentage is actually lower is because he's one of the guys that actually can hit that mid-range jumper. So he has a tendency to take that shot when he's given it. And he's not going to give you 20 a game. He's just not that type of player. Pretty solid in terms of defense, though, almost averaging 1.5 blocks per game over the last 4 years on an average basis. But as a guy who could play on a team like the Warriors or the Cavaliers even, I don't even see how Tristan Thompson and Pachulia can compare to him because of his ability to not only make shots from the mid-range, but the rebounding is so good, and he's such a active player as a screener as well. If he was put into the right system, obviously that you can say that for so many players, but I think his offensive rebounding ability is so valuable in the league that it can really add a valuable piece. It can really add a lot of good playmaking and good offensive abilities or good offensive opportunities. More offensive opportunities for teams that are in contention, and he just hasn't had that luxury, unfortunately. But he's such a fun player to watch. Obviously, he brings a lot of entertainment to the game with the mascots and everything like that. But I have to go with underrated because his offensive rebounding ability is very good. Can step out and hit the mid-range jumper a little bit. Post hook game is really solid. One of the best guys I love to watch in the post because of his hook. It's really fun to watch him go to work on that. But I'm a personal fan of Robin Lopez, so I got to go with underrated for him.
Yeah, here's something to think about. In his first, let's see, in his first 13 seasons in the league, Zaza Pachulia never shot over 50% from the field. Lopez has done that several times. He's more efficient than Zaza. I don't know if I would put him up there with Tristan Thompson. You mentioned Rolo's offensive rebounding, but Tristan is probably the best offensive rebounder in the league. I mean, that's why he got $80 million from the Cavs. But still, I think that if you put a guy like Robin Lopez on the Warriors, obviously his stats are going to go up because he's playing with 4 All-Stars. But it's not inconceivable to think that he would, put up better numbers than 6 points and 6 rebounds in a system with the Warriors like Zaza Pachulia did. Like you said, he can step out and hit the mid-range a little bit, which is something that Zaza cannot do, something that really Tristan Thompson can't do either. So that's an edge over both of them. He's a great free throw shooter. Zaza is a pretty good free throw shooter. I don't know how Rolo can compare in that
Rolo's
regard.
about the 70 to 80 range in free throw percentage year in, year out.
Zaza's at about 74%, so they're pretty even
so relatively
there.
close. Yeah.
But I think just because he's played on some small market teams, Chicago is really, I think I'm going to go ahead and say Chicago and New York, a couple seasons there, pretty big markets, and that's when he started to kind of pick up steam. People started to recognize him. He gets some recognition in the media. But when you start out your career in a place like Phoenix, not exactly a big market, it's hard to get attention there. And I think that kind of hurt him. But like I said, put him in the right system. I think he's a definitely a top 15 center in the league. And for sure better than a guy like Zaza. So, underrated for me.
Yeah, underrated as well, yeah. So, I guess we'll go into your next player.
All right, my next guy, I've made my opinions rather strongly known about this guy, so I'm interested to see what you say. Derrick Rose.
Mm-hmm. Derrick Rose. Now, at this point in his career, he's getting up there for sure in terms of his age. And I got to go with just right, because I don't really think that at this point in his career, guys in general and analysts think that he is as good as he used to be. That's just my opinion on it. I'll probably let you have the floor for a lot of this, but his points per game, I mean, ever since the injury, it's tough. You know, you can't really just make an argument for him anymore as one of those top guys in the league. A guy who, as a jump shooter, is inconsistent, probably takes too many jump shots. He really should be going to the basket way more often than not, trying to get to the free throw line as much as humanly possible. From the three-point line, nothing crazy there. Last year really was not very efficient. His whole career really hasn't been an efficient three-point shooter. And so he really is a guy that is, one way, driving to the lane, can hit the mid-range on occasion, but just isn't as polished as the guy like Russell Westbrook, who a lot of guys compare him to in terms of explosiveness and being able to pull up and hit that. And defensively, doesn't really do too much. So, and it was a former MVP, so it's just crazy how his career has kind of moved around. But definitely Derrick Rose, I would say, is in the right place right now in terms of how people think of him, at least from what I've seen. I haven't seen people look at Derrick Rose and say at this point in his career that he's one of the best in the league. So that's why I feel like he's properly rated as an okay player who just has lost his way in the league and is not what he used to be in any way, shape, or form.
People, they call me a Derrick Rose hater, and I guess it is. I guess I probably am one. I don't think that he really should have won the MVP in 2012, 2011. I think that the top two choices should have been Dwight Howard and LeBron James. But that being said, I can definitely understand why he won the MVP. And just to be in the conversation at such a young age, it's pretty remarkable. That being said, in today's game, I just don't see a team where Derrick Rose has a place on it. I talked about it kind of yesterday or a couple days ago on our last podcast, but if we look at the contenders, if you swapped out Derrick Rose for any starter on the contenders, I don't see anyone that gets any better. And if you look at that second tier kind of team, guys like Milwaukee, Denver, Minnesota, guys like that, I still don't see it, If he goes to Milwaukee, that's taking the ball out of Giannis's hands, which is the last thing the Bucks want to do. They want to continue to improve him as a playmaker, and you have to be a playmaker. You need the ball in your hands, which is another problem for Derrick Rose. I think he's a guy that needs the ball in his hands to be effective, but he's not a good shooter. He's not a good passer. So really, all he does is drive to the rim. And if a team can key in on stopping him from driving to the rim, or he meets an elite rim protector there, he's kind of out of luck. He's not the playmaker that he once was. And while he had a pretty efficient year last year by his standards, 47% from the field. He's an atrocious three-point shooter. From three-point land, he averages under 30% for his career. Now, granted, he only takes about 2.5 threes a game, which is a little more than you'd like him to, but in today's NBA, you have to shoot the three. You can't not shoot it when it's open. But I just don't see how he makes anybody better. He does not play defense. And the problem with him is, and I think this is the biggest problem, is he still thinks that he's the player that he was. He still thinks of himself as an MVP. And he's just not at that level anymore. I think that he's a below-average starter just because that he doesn't spread the floor. He doesn't really create, can't shoot, and he doesn't pass. That being said, I think if someone were to bring him off the bench as a scoring option, limited minutes, maybe 20, 22 minutes a game, nothing crazy, and just bring him as like a firecracker in the second unit, I think he could really flourish and turn himself into one of the best 6 men in the league. But from what it looks like in the reports that we're getting, he has no intention of doing that. Earlier, he talked about wanting a max contract. As far as today, he's still unsigned by any team, which goes back to me talking about I just don't see a team that gets better from having him, especially at his price range. People talk about, maybe having him there to like mentor a young point guard, but like let's think of the young point guards in the league. He plays nothing like Lonzo. He doesn't really play like Fultz, so he wouldn't be a good fit in Philly anyways. Dallas, his closest comparison, at least in this rookie class, is probably Dennis Smith Jr. And if I'm the Mavs, I'm keeping them as far away from Derrick Rose as possible. I think that whoever Derrick Rose signs with, when they play the Mavs should bench Dennis Smith Jr. so that he doesn't catch that injury bug that Derrick Rose had. Just don't even risk it. Don't even play him against him. Don't let him touch. The comparisons are too similar as it is. Just don't let him touch. It's a shame that he fell off so far after his injuries. And, I want to root for him and I want him to succeed. But to do that, I think he just has to go ahead and change his game. And so far, he's shown no indication of doing that. No indication that he can really play with and mentor young guys. Just this past season in New York, when it got into the last 2 minutes of the game, instead of deferring to guys like Porzingis and Carmelo in the clutch, he tried to do it all himself, turning the ball over, taking bad shots at the rim, and it was just tough to watch, And so I think that his time in this league is quickly coming to an end if he can't change his mindset, maybe open himself to coming off the bench. And I think it's a reality check for him that we're 2 weeks into free agency and he still hasn't signed with a team when he thought he might be getting some max offers. So Derrick Rose, I think, might be the most overrated player in the league, at least in my opinion. I'm just not a fan. I like I said, I don't see how he makes anybody better. And for a point guard, for you to say that about a point guard is probably the worst thing that you could say about a point guard. So.
Yeah. We agree in some areas. I don't think he's overrated just because I don't think people are dumb enough at this point to put him as among the best players in the league. Rated. Those are our thoughts on Derrick Rose right there. So we're getting into another player who really, it's kind of funny. He was a 5-time All-Star player out of LA. We've got Blake Griffin. Is he overrated or underrated? Or just properly rated, obviously.
I'm actually going to go with an. I think you're going to disagree with me here. I'm going to go ahead and say that Blake Griffin is actually pretty underrated. I think that he has caught the injury bug, and it's really kind of changed the public's view of him. Of course, he had that little spat with the trainer where he punched the trainer, and of course the meltdowns in the playoffs that ultimately led to Chris Paul leaving. But that being said, Blake Griffin, when he's healthy and when he's doing the things that he can do and should do, I think he's clear-cut one of the best power forwards in the league. When we look at his stats this year, pretty good around the board. 21 points a game, 8 rebounds, 5 assists. He's one of, if not the best playmakers from the power forward position. And there's even talk of the Clippers running him at point guard some this upcoming season. He's got a tight handle. His turnovers, it's not too bad. 2 turnovers a game. Pretty standard. At least when it comes to guys that have a usage rate kind of around what he does. So I think that I'm gonna go ahead and say underrated. He has been playing second fiddle to Chris Paul this whole time, and Chris Paul, I think while he's such a good, pure point guard, I think he can be tough to play with at times just because he's so in control all the time. And Blake is one of those guys that needs the ball to be effective. And I think with CP3 out and Blake really giving the reins to the offense, I think we're going to see him flourish and regain his spot as one of the top forwards in the league as long as he can stay healthy. He's one of those guys we talked about earlier. Kyle Lowry doesn't really step his game up in the playoffs that much. Blake traditionally has some really good playoffs. 2013, 23 points a game. 2014, 25 points a game. In this past season, 20 points a game, although I'm pretty sure he was still recovering from some injuries. Um, he got all that recognition, his rookie year as that high-flying dunker. But he's kind of taking a step back. He can shoot the three now. At times, he's not, a great shooter by any means, but a respectable 33% from deep, about league average there. He can improve. He's shown in 2014, his last All-Star season, that he can hit from deep, 40% from beyond the arc that year. And, his defense, nothing really to write home about. But when you have a guy like DeAndre Jordan backing you up, that's not really too much of a problem. So I think that Blake is underrated. And I think we're going to see that this year when Chris Paul takes the reins in Houston and Blake really can run the way he likes to, run in transition, get the ball and push it up the court. His assist numbers are going to go up for sure. And I think his scoring will too, now that he doesn't have to share a lot of the load with Chris Paul. So I'm interested to see what happens.
In all honesty, with the loss of Chris Paul in LA and some of the other players, basically, Blake Griffin's given the key to the kingdom. He basically has the ability to be the man in LA now, even with DeAndre Jordan still there. And it's interesting because I actually do think his numbers are going to go up. I think all of his numbers could go up, but it's sort of a Russell Westbrook effect. I think it's kind of, addition by subtraction in a way, but only via numbers and not through wins. Because when you look at what CP3 was able to do, obviously they weren't able to win any championships, and Blake Griffin's numbers are still very good. They're going to go up. They're probably going to go increase in points, rebounds, and a lot of areas. But I just think that as a player, he's seen by the media. And this is why I have him as overrated. I think he's seen by the media and by a lot of people as a better player than he actually is. And I don't know if that's necessarily his fault. I think that in part it's because of the lack of playoff success the Clippers have really had. In the past couple of years. I mean, he has averaged a lot of points per game in the regular season. And obviously, I think a lot of us remember how effective he was in the 2014-2015 playoffs, where he averaged 25 and 12. But I just think that as a whole, people think a little bit too highly of him. I think some people place him in that category of just some of the best players in the league, and I just don't know if he's at that level yet. And I think he very well could prove me wrong, but I think that because people have already kind of touted him as that for so many years, I just don't see it. And I think that I don't think the power forward position in general is very strong in the NBA anymore. I think he benefits from that in being ranked as a top power forward in the league, or one of the best power forwards in the league. Has had some injury troubles that I think also plays a role that, in my opinion, of him being overrated as a player in terms of his production value for the team that he's on in LA. But in terms of numbers, I think they'll go up. But in my opinion, again, I just think he's an overrated player in the league, and that's just my view on things with Blake Griffin.
So where do you think you would rank him in terms of power forwards?
In terms of power forwards, I would probably rank him pretty high up there. If I look at the points per game, and you just look at the production from there, and then you kind of take a look at some of the players, do we consider Anthony Davis a power forward?
Yeah, as long as he's on the team with Cousins, let's go ahead and name him power forward.
Okay, so we name Anthony Davis a power forward. I think it's tough to not put Anthony Davis at the top of the power forward. I think we can both agree on that. And I'm gonna put Draymond Green as a 2 or 3 at the power forward position and rank. He's a better defender than Blake by a mile. He can shoot threes like Blake can. His mid-range and offensive game as a whole is definitely not as polished as Blake's, but I think his playmaking ability is just as good, if not better, than Blake's. And again, he does play with better teammates, but I have to go with Draymond over Blake Griffin as a player. I mean, obviously, you could make the argument that Blake is a guy that you want to build your team around a little bit more because he can produce on offense, but I like having guys that can play defense, and those guys ultimately win championships, in my opinion. So I got to go with Draymond Green over him. And then you have a legitimate argument for him being top 3 right there with guys like LaMarcus Aldridge, Porzingis. I don't know if you can really put Kevin Love in the conversation anymore, but those type of players. So I would probably put him at 3 or 4 behind maybe LaMarcus Aldridge.
All right, so that's an interesting point that you bring up there. Draymond versus Blake. Traditionally, Draymond actually eats Blake's lunch every time they play. It baffles me just the way that Blake just kind of gets against Draymond in the post, and he kind of takes like 3 dribbles trying to back him down. Draymond's too strong, and Blake ends up throwing this weird, crazy. It almost looks like he's having a seizure the way he throws up his post hooks against Draymond. He doesn't really rebound well against Draymond. He just generally really struggles. That being said, I don't think that you can win a championship with Blake Griffin as your first option. I just don't think you can.
Yeah,
that being said,
I don't think you could with Draymond either.
Yeah, I don't think you can win with Blake as your first option. I definitely think you can win with Blake as your second option. That being said, a guy like Draymond, if he's your first or second option on offense, I don't think there's any way that you're getting anywhere close to winning a championship. Draymond is a guy that really thrives off of being like the third or fourth option on offense, standing back, surveying the court, getting space to find open guys. I will agree with you and say that he's a better playmaker than Blake. Now, how much of that comes from playing with Curry and Clay and now KD and getting all that open space on the floor out of, because, so many times teams will they'll trap Curry off of pick and rolls. And so what the Warriors will do is they'll screen him with Draymond, and then Curry runs a really high pick and roll. A lot of times you'll see Curry start the pick and roll 3 or 4 feet behind the three-point line, which is something really only he can do, because if that was any other player in the league, obviously you're just going to have somebody go under that screen. But with Curry being the shooter he is, you have to guard him even that far out. So a lot of teams are going to double. He passes off to Draymond, and now Draymond runs 4-on-3. And that's how he gets a lot of his assist numbers and why he's regarded as such a great playmaker. I don't think Blake would do as good in that role as Draymond, at least in a passing role. So Draymond is a better playmaker in my opinion. That being said, I just think that Blake overall is a better player. His all-around game is better, at least on the offensive end. Now, it's such an interesting debate. Who is more?
It's really tough to debate it, because it all depends on the team and the place you're put in. And again, because Blake is so good on offense, and he can get by being okay on defense. That's what makes him appear as a better player. But and it's really tough to compare, because Draymond is so valuable to the Warriors. But you're right in that he's just not the player Blake is on offense, and in a lot of ways, I think that kind of makes it tough to argue that he's a better player than a guy like Blake Griffin.
And yeah, it's so tough. Like, let's say we were doing rankings of the top 30 players in the league or whatever, would we rank Draymond over Blake Griffin just because of how vital Draymond is to winning some championships? Or do we go with what the numbers say and in a vacuum say that Blake is a better player than Draymond? I honestly don't know. I don't know. I think
because Draymond defensively is arguably the best player in the league as well. So that's another argument you can make. I mean, is his value as a defensive player so great that it is superior to Blake's ability to be a number 1 or number 2 option on a team? It's tough to debate that. I don't know. I'm a defensive guy, so that's why I went with Draymond. I feel like his abilities as a defensive player makes him better than him. But it's so subjective to what your school of thought is and the situation they're in, the teams that they're in. It's really tough to really just straight up and definitively say who's better.
Yeah, I think that Draymond is the best defensive player in the league. I think Kawhi's a better perimeter defender by just a hair. But
because Draymond can be in the post.
Draymond can bang in the post, and Kawhi doesn't really play any defense down there on the block against big guys. Obviously you're not going to put Kawhi on like a 7-footer. You wouldn't even put Kawhi on Blake, I don't think. And you can put a guy like Draymond on anybody on the court. One of my favorite plays to watch is actually a play from this past playoffs. The Trailblazers and Warriors, and Draymond in one possession guarded every single player on the floor for the Trailblazers, 1 through 5. He started out, I think it was one of the Plumlee brothers that he started out on. and then he switched on to, Lillard, McCollum, all those guys, and then forced a tough shot at the end that was a miss, and then grabbed the board and ran down the court and initiated the offense. So I think you're right. In a vacuum, maybe Blake is a better player, but I think if we're ranking them as terms as who is more important to team success, I'd go Draymond. So I'll agree with you there.
Yeah, it is tough. Yeah. So I guess we're on to your final player then.
My last guy. This one's a little tricky. And it might sound a little hypocritical from what I was saying about Conley earlier, but I'm going to go with Damian Lillard. Overrated or underrated? What do you think?
Damian Lillard. Wow, that is a tough one. I'm going to say it's tough because it really just depends on where you've been hearing your information from. But I feel like I'm going to put him at... Again, I don't want to do it, but I feel like I have to because I've heard people say, that he is, a deserving player of an all-star, and he's had just phenomenal years. But again, the confidence that is in this, a Mike Conley effect. It's so hard to get past guys like Curry, Harden, Westbrook, those type of players in the West, and CP3, and those players to be an all-star guy and to have those accolades on your career. He still averaged 27 a game last year, almost 40% from the three-point line, 44% from the field. He still can get a decent amount of assists. He's not, a Ricky Rubio or whatever, or anybody you want to name in terms of passing the ball, but he's still an excellent scorer. Really, he's a great scorer, and his ability as a guy to be the number one scorer on a team is really valuable. But I think he's just right. The reason why is because I wouldn't say he's overrated because he just doesn't have, the West is so stacked with guards that those other three guys are going to be regarded as overrated over him like any day of the week. And in terms of being underrated, well, how can you really say he's underrated? He's gotten 2 All-Star appearances and he's leading a team, 27 points a game. He's one of the better scorers in the league in the point guard position in particular. So you could go with underrated. I don't know how you could go with overrated. I'm going to go with just right.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that he didn't make an All-Star game. And yet it makes sense at the same time. Like,
yeah.
On one hand, you look at his numbers and you just wonder to yourself, how in the world did this guy not make the All-Star game? 27 points a game, 6 assists, 5 rebounds. He's a fantastic shooter. His three-point percentage is a little deceiving. It's a little deceiving. He shot 37% from deep on 12 attempts a game. No, I'm sorry. On 7 attempts a game. He takes a lot of tough shots. A lot of his threes are off the dribble. A lot of his threes are pull-ups. He doesn't really get a ton of catch-and-shoot threes. And just so by degree of difficulty, it's going to bring his percentage down. That being said, I put him in that upper echelon of shooters. I think he's one of the only guys in the league that you're okay with pulling from about 30 feet. Obviously, you have Curry, Durant up there, Kyrie when he's hot, and of course Klay. But I definitely toss Lillard in that group. He's shown that he can stroke it from deep pretty much whenever he wants, a hand in his face or not. So I am of the opinion that he is underrated, because of the conference that he plays in. He puts up numbers, and I know I said that Conley was overrated because of the conference that he plays in. He doesn't have the accolades or anything like that. But Lillard has 2 All-Star games to his name. And arguably the 2 seasons that he didn't make it, these past 2 seasons, were more deserving than the 2 that he got. 25 points a game in 2015 and 27 points a game in 2016. It just happened to coincide with Curry hitting 402 threes and then Westbrook averaging the triple-double. So nothing he can really do there. He isn't on a team that is really regarded as highly as some of the other ones in the league when it comes to terms with talent. CJ McCollum is the number 2 on the team, but after that, it's kind of in limbo. You have, Yusuf Nurkic, who they acquired at the deadline, and they made a strong playoff push towards the end of the year and were able to grab that 8th seed in the Western Conference. But still, I think the Grizzlies were a better team overall. I think that obviously the Thunder were a better team by a slight margin. Houston for sure. And I just think that if you were to put him on a team, I think if you were to switch him and Kyrie Irving, the Cavaliers would not be any worse off. Let's just put it that way. And yet I constantly see, Kyrie ranked ahead of Dame in most lists that I see, and I just don't see it. I think that this year is going to be a big year for him. I think that he is going to get used to playing with Yusuf. CJ McCollum is going to continue to develop. And I think Lillard is going to have a chip on his shoulder, again, from not making the All-Star game and getting bounced in the first round of the playoffs via sweep. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch. I definitely think he's underrated. He is one of the best point guards in the league. I think if we were to rank them, it would go something like Curry number 1, Westbrook number 2, Chris Paul number 3, John Wall number 4, and then after that, the 5th spot there is in contention. You can throw Mike Conley in there. You can throw Kyrie Irving in there. Isaiah Thomas, some people think. And you could also throw Lillard in there. And I'm of the group that thinks that Lillard should be in that group as a top 5 point guard in the league. I think that he puts up pretty similar numbers to Kyrie. Better all around. I think he's a better passer than Kyrie. He rebounds at a higher rate. And so if he got to play next to LeBron, his 3-point percentage would definitely go up. He'd be more efficient. He'd probably still score the same amount. And I think he would definitely be viewed as a better player if he was in Kyrie's situation instead of his current one. So I'm definitely going with underrated for Damian Lillard.
Those are really valid arguments, to be honest with you. And you do definitely bring up a good point with him and what he could possibly do if he was playing with LeBron James. And speaking of LeBron James, we're going to finish this podcast out with a bang right here. In LeBron James, is he overrated, underrated, or is he just right in his career at this point en route to what we believe is probably going to be his 8th NBA Finals appearance in a row heading on into the 2017-2018 season?
Okay. You and I have talked about this before, and we have very, very different viewpoints on LeBron James. I think that right now, he is properly rated where he should be as the best player in the league. I don't think you can overrate him or underrate him in that regard. I think he is the best player in the league. And so most people rate him there, so I'm going to go ahead and say he's properly rated right now. In a historical sense...
historical. Let's go historical.
Historical sense, underrated. And this is where we differ.
Holy shit.
This is where we differ. LeBron James, to me, is at absolute worst a top 5 player at all time, to me. And I've written about this before, and we've talked about this before. I think that he's not number 1. I think MJ is clear-cut number 1. Kareem has a pretty solid grasp on number 2, it seems, just because of the longevity of his career and the cumulative stats that he pulled up. But LeBron, I think, is 3rd at worst. I have him over both Magic and Bird. And I think he has a strong case for being the 2nd greatest player of all time. 8 straight finals, triple-double in the finals, so it's not like when his team loses, it can be pinned on him, except for 2011, of course, which is pretty hard to defend, even for the biggest LeBron fan. The only thing I'll say is... in 2011, if you go back and watch the tape, a lot of times LeBron made the right basketball play, the textbook basketball play, but sometimes textbook doesn't win you championships, and sometimes the best play for your team is for you to shoot the ball, and he didn't do that. He was passive, and he deferred too much, and that's going to be a big stain on his legacy. He could win, 5 championships in a row after this, and people would still bring up the series against the Mavs because it was so unlike him. However, since then, he's been to 6 straight finals, probably going to make a 7th one since the Dallas one this year.
I think it's 8th this year. I think it's 8.
And I personally, I've never seen a player with an all-around game like him. He's not regarded as a score-first kind of player. He's a pass-first guy, and he still averages 27 points a game for his career. I think that he is underrated as a passer. His vision is phenomenal, and he can make passes. Here's an example. There was a play his first year back in Cleveland, maybe his second, that's always stuck out to me. He's standing on the left wing. He gets a skip pass from the corner. It flies all the way across the court, and it's about 3 feet too high. I think it was JR that threw the pass, about 3 feet too high. And LeBron jumps up and grabs it with one hand, and before his feet touch the ground, he fires off a no-look pass to his left, hits Iman Shumpert right in the shooter's pocket, and Shumpert drains a three, and LeBron gets an assist. That kind of play is a play that how many people in the league or even in history could make that? Magic probably, Bird definitely could have made it, MJ could have made it. And after that, it's a pretty short list of guys that have the vision and ability and the athletic talent to actually do that. He's 6'8", 250 pounds, the best athlete on the court at all times. He's 31 years old, I think, 32, something like that. And he still is just, he bulldozes past everybody. The Warriors couldn't stop him. In Game 5, he put up 41, 12, and 11 or something crazy like that. And it's just, I don't know. I think that people like to hate on him because he has a losing record in the finals. But a lot of that, you look at his numbers, and he played his game, and he played really well. I don't think anyone can fault him for losing in 2015 against the Warriors with his second and third best player out. Then you turn around and look at 2016, where he led both teams in all 5 major statistical categories, something that had never been done before. Not even Jordan was able to do that. And that's why I like to say that LeBron probably has one of the most rounded games of all time. And that's something that I think puts him ahead of Jordan. He's a better passer than Jordan, a better rebounder, I'm going to go ahead and say. And while he's not a better one-on-one defender, he is definitely he's not a better one-on-one defender. But I think he is a more versatile defender. There was a time in his prime when he could guard 1 through 5 for short stretches, and Jordan was limited to the perimeter. Now, some of that's genetics, but I mean that plays a part in all-time rankings. He dragged a horrible Cleveland team to the finals in 2007, and he has dragged every team since 2011 to the finals with him. And I just don't see how we can look back on his career and the stats that he's accumulated, the accomplishments that he's accumulated, and not say he's the second best player of all time, third at worst if we're talking about Kareem. I just don't see it.
All right, so we gave you the opportunity to defend the man LeBron James, and you highlighted a lot of the points that I think a lot of LeBron James fans out there would probably be thrilled to have heard. Now we're going to get into a little bit of what I believe drags LeBron down and why I believe he is both overrated in today's game as well as in a historical sense. And when you look at the numbers of LeBron James' career, obviously they're just absolutely phenomenal. Averaging as a career 7 assists, 7.3 rebounds, 27 points. I mean, from the field, you see him 50% from the field, so just extreme efficiency. But there's some aspects of the game where things get really subjective when it comes to debates, and part of that is the team you play for and the conference you are in. Just specifically going off of the Eastern Conference, I've done a whole video on YouTube about the Eastern Conference and how it's been just way inferior than the West over the past 20 years. It's almost remarkable if you look at the 50-win teams the West has had and the discrepancy in the East. I mean, it is incredible, but that's a different discussion for a different day. I think that the competition alone in the East and how bad it's been, and the fact that he's been able to make so many finals in a row has elevated LeBron's legacy to just an incredibly high level. Because if he doesn't make those finals in a row that many times, it has been at the highlight of
the NBA's season so many times. I don't know if he's discussed as much. And then, okay, so that's one point. But what if he wins those finals? Well, he has a losing record, 3-5, and obviously you can't choose your teams. He's gone up against some good teams in the finals. You always do, and just the fact that he's gone 3-5 is obviously a big point for a lot of people to make against LeBron, and hating on him for losing those finals. And you really can't lose a finals just off of one player. But at the end of the day, it's always crazy to me because I can't imagine if he would have the same success in the West. I just think it's such a superior conference that I don't know. Inflated because of that in all time. One of the biggest things and one of the biggest points that I have against LeBron, the biggest gripe I have probably with LeBron, is his production at the end of games. And obviously you can go back to 2011 and reference that, but even in 2017, modern day, I mean, game 4, I believe, of the NBA Finals at home, you're down 2-0. It seemed like there was a little bit of, and people talked about him making the right basketball move, basketball decision, and at times that might be the case. And that's just why I just don't have him as a guy that's top 5 all time, because he's just not the player that's going to be your man at the end of the game, making a game-winning shot or taking it to the basket and saying, okay, my team needs a bucket, I got to go get it, no matter how great of a look this is for my teammate. I got to put faith in myself in this situation. I'm 1v1, I'm the best player in the world, I got to be able to take this to the rack and be able to score a bucket. And he just doesn't have that mentality. And one more thing I want to point out is free throw percentage is one thing that is a bit surprising to me that nobody discusses too frequently when you talk about LeBron James. For being a player that many people regard as, if not the best player, not only in our game today, but of all time, for him to shoot, around 74% for his career, 67% last year, it's a bit low for for me to put faith in him. So that's just my personal opinion on the matter. Obviously, he's a phenomenal player, will go down as one of the greatest ever, but I think sometimes the media wants him to be at highest level all the time. They want to create that story, so I think that's why I think he's overrated. And it's tough to overrate a guy that great, but I think he is overrated. I just think that's how great some people think he is. But those are my opinions on LeBron James.
Well, one day I'll convince you. I'll convince you one day.
Yeah, one day we'll get to the bottom of it. But at the end of his career, I'm assuming.
Probably. No, you make up some good points, and those are all valid criticisms of LeBron, not being able to, really deliver in the fourth quarter is one of the things people say about him. It's weird. He has his flashes. Usually, in the Eastern Conference playoffs, he had that game winner in the playoffs against Orlando, game winner against Chicago, and the game winner against Indiana. But I think that when we talk about, him playing in the East, and that kind of being the measure for his success.
It's not his fault that he plays in the East.
Right. But when I think about if he played in the West, I don't think he would have been to eight finals, 8 straight. Not even close. But I do think that would we look at him in a different light if, say, his finals record was 4-0 instead of 3-5? Would we rank him differently if he was 4-0?
Yeah, for sure.
I think he definitely gets out of the West into the finals 4 times in the last however many or so years, because when we think about if he's playing in the West, that means he's going to be on a Western Conference team, which means he's going to be on a team with a lot of talent, at least as much talent as Cleveland. And so he might not make the finals as many times, but I think when he does, just because it's such a bloodbath out there and the East is so weak, especially without LeBron, that it would be a cakewalk in the finals for him. And I don't think he would have any finals losses if he played in the West. He wouldn't have as many visits and maybe not as many wins, but I definitely don't think that he would have as many losses. So I think it's an interesting thing to think about. If LeBron played in the West, how he would be viewed in all-time rankings, and if he might be the consensus number 2 over Kareem.
It's definitely tough. It's definitely a tough argument to make.
because the West is really pretty loaded, and he would have to build a team that was also really great in the West. It's a situation. We'll probably get into it for another day, but I think that just about probably wraps up what we did the podcast in the overrated, underrated series, and getting into a discussion of some players' legacies. So, do you have anything else to add to what we've done?
No, I think that's going to be it. One quick thing. What do you think of Jonathan Simmons signing with Orlando, 3 years, $20 million?
It's funny. I was actually gonna Simmons on a piece I wrote just recently on the players rising in the NBA, and Jonathan Simmons is one of those guys in my eyes. I mean, I remember watching him in the playoffs this past postseason, even against guys like Kevin Durant and some of the better players. He was really performing at a pretty high level, and I don't know if it was just a spur of the moment type thing for him, but I think he has the potential to be a contributor for Orlando. I mean, he certainly looked the part in San Antonio as a scorer and as an athletic player, even defensively. So I'm excited. I'm rooting for him. I'm hoping that he turns out to be a good player. I don't know how much of a detriment it really is to San Antonio because he played kind of sparingly and never really had a solidified role with them. But I'm excited for him. I really want to see him thrive.
I'm surprised. There's a couple of reports coming out that San Antonio didn't even make an offer for him. So that's surprising to me, but I'm excited to see what he can do in Orlando. So I think it's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
But I think that goes ahead and wraps it up. Just gonna throw it out there. We do have the YouTube channel up and running, which is what you're probably listening to this on right now. But go ahead and make sure you follow us on Twitter at @the_heat_check_. And we'll post all our content there, articles, podcasts, everything like that. Also, if you guys have any questions that you'd like for us to answer on the podcast, the next time we do a mailbag podcast, feel free to email us at heatcheckorg@gmail.com. We'd love to get some emails and hear some thoughts from the readers and answer some of your questions on the podcast. So, there's that. Anything you want to add, Matt?
No, I think that just about wraps it up.
All right, until next time, this is us signing off.